Hi, I'm Chris Cooper. Welcome to the Family Plot, Gardening in the Mid-South. Thanks for joining us. Planting fall flower bulbs is a simple way to add color to your landscape next spring. Today, Dale Skaggs is here to give us some advice on planting a variety of fall bulbs. We'll also take a tour of the Soil Test Lab in Nashville and give you some helpful tips on interpreting the results. All that and more is just ahead on the Family Plot, Gardening in the Mid-South, so stay with us.
This is a production of WKNO Memphis. Production funding for the Family Plot, Gardening in the Mid-South is provided by Goodwin's Landscape and Garden Center in Germantown since 1943 and continuing to offer its plants for successful gardening with 7 greenhouses and 3 acres of plants, plus comprehensive landscape services. International Paper Foundation, the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
Hi, welcome to the Family Plot. I'm Chris Cooper. Joining me today is Dale Skaggs. Dale is the Director of Horticulture at the Dixon Garden, and Mr. D is here.
Glad to be here.
Thanks for having us. Beautiful table we have here today, Dale. We appreciate you bringing all these lovely plants. So let's get started. We want spring color. How about bulbs?
Yeah, bulbs are a great way to have your spring color. You know, they're prepackaged plants, so it's pretty amazing. You have a flower already in here ready to come out in the spring. Now's the time. October's the month generally to start planting your daffodils.
Okay.
November's usually the month for the tulip. The daffodils are, of course, perennials that come back every year, and you see old abandoned home sites and things that still have the daffodils pushing up every year. The tulips, however, in our heavy clay soils and in our climate, they're not as well suited. So we typically think of these as one-shot annuals. So that flower was formed over in Holland inside this bulb, and we put it in the ground and we let it go, have a beautiful spring, and then at the Dixon we pluck them out of the ground and start over. So kind of an extravagant thing to some extent, but the daffodils come back and perform year after year. So anyway, we plant both, and we've had some great daffodil exhibitions and tulip exhibitions at the Dixon. And planting as many as one year we planted 150,000 bulbs at the Dixon.
Oh my goodness.
What happens if you plant them upside down?
Well, that's pointy side up is what they always say, right? But if you plant them the wrong way, it's just going to take more energy to force that bulb to. But it knows which way's up. It has it has an internal internal way to know what's up. So you can't really plant them wrong. Anyway, it's and people always ask about different depth and everything. Most of the tulips we plant at the Dixon, we actually plant with a soil knife. We're really not concerned about depth, just as long as they're not in a part of the ground that's going to be frozen solid. We're okay. Because as I said, we're going to take them up after they're finished.
Okay. Well, tell me this: how do you prepare the site, for your bulbs?
Well, there's a couple ways to do it. The daffodil purist would tell you that if you're going to leave them there a long time, the way to do it is to dig out an entire bed area, lay the bulbs out, put the soil aside on a tarp and backfill. It's a lot of work.
Yes.
So one way to do it is with these planters, and these local nursery lent these to me. This is kind of fun. I'd never seen this before. This has never been used. I was hoping we'd get to plant it. Look at this. Feed me, Seymour. So anyway, that's pretty neat. It's called a hound dog, and I'm wondering how it works. But I have bulb planters that you typically just step on here, and they're the easiest to use, especially if the ground's hard at all. And it has a measuring gauge. I don't think I would actually use the measuring gauge, but anyway, you can step on it and then release the clod of clay soil, which is really helpful here in Memphis. Historically, you just keep stepping on it, and the new clod knocks the old clod out. So, but anyway, pretty easy to plant with this method, I think. Some people use these hand devices, but these are rough on the wrist, But I tell you that
Good exercise, though.
Yeah,
the gardeners at the Dixon prefer that soil knife. They just stick the soil knife in the ground, pry it open, and drop a bulb. But when you're planting as many as they're planting, and Brent Heath says he's Brent and Becky's Bulbs. Brent Heath, he says that the best way to do it is to just put the bulbs on top of the ground and actually pile your compost on top.
Huh.
And so that's an easier way to do it. He said calls it the lazy man's way to plant bulbs. But and with our heavy clay soils, maybe that's good.
That sounds like a pretty good way. Now, how about fertilizing? Because we always get that question at the extension office.
Well, a lot of people use bone meal.
Yeah.
But there are bulb food fertilizers, but I mean they're a plant, so they typically like complete fertilizer is probably good for most of your bulbs. People say, oh, phosphorus and potassium is what you need, but they actually have green leaves that are making food for next year.
Sure.
And I would say if you're planting a tulip for one shot, you really don't need a lot of nutrients there. But if you're planting daffodils that are going to persist in the landscape a long time, I would go ahead and fertilize them because you want those leaves to have nitrogen and all of that. Sure. So,
all right, Dale, we want to get to our camellias.
All right, one last thing.
Okay, one last thing.
Another way to plant.
Yeah.
This is
I've used that before.
If you're power tool savvy, isn't this fun? So you put this on the end of a drill.
Yeah.
But you need a pretty heavy duty drill. I think you could. A lady was telling me that I had recommended this to at a Dixon class, and she told me that it caused great strife in her marital relationship because she tore up her husband's drill with using this. So anyway,
he needed a better drill.
He needed a better drill.
Yeah, get you a better.
So don't buy your.
Okay.
Yeah. Buy a good drill.
Okay.
All right.
All right, now we can go to our camellias. All right.
All right.
Well, we have a couple of minutes to do that. Where do you want to start with this, Dale?
Well, camellias are, the Dixon has a history with camellias. Hugo and Margaret Dixon grew camellias, and early on there was a camellia house, which is a lath structure, which is sort of to protect the camellias from the sun. Camellias are wonderful plants that are not used very often here in the Mid-South. And a lot of people think that we're too far north for it. We're probably the northernmost range of the camellia belt where you can grow Japanese camellias, but these are sasanquas, and they bloom in the fall. All of these blossoms were cut this morning at the Dixon, so
beautiful.
This shows you a little bit of what's going on. This guy here is Yuletide, which is blooming a little bit earlier than usual, but great plant, Yuletide, dark green foliage, just fantastic. They're easy care plants for the shade. Okay. They come in a range of colors and sizes, and the ones that bloom in the fall are the sasanquas. This is
that's pretty.
Yeah, we've got Winter Beauty, I think is this one. This is Winter Beauty, which is a double. And this single one is Cleopatra. So there's all kinds of wonderful names. This is the only Japanese camellia in the bunch. And I think I have one fully open over by you, the one that's big right there, if you want to pull that one out, the red one, right here. And that's Professor Sargent, which is it's named for John Springer Sargent, who was the first director of the Arnold Arboretum at Harvard. Wow. But that's a cool one. And it's the only Japanese one. The rest of them are all sasanquas. Okay. I know in the South, tea is kind of something everybody drinks, and this is actually the tea camellia. This is Camellia sinensis, and you can grow it, and it's attractive. Of course, it doesn't have the size or the colors that you get from some of the others, but this is a form of the tea camellia, and so the tips of this particular plant is picked in the spring, and they make green tea or black tea, or I think there's a couple of other teas that are made from it, but it's the caffeinated beverage that most of the world drinks.
That's right.
Wow.
Especially here in the South.
Yeah.
I see Mr. D must be interested because he actually wrote down a couple of those names.
I did.
Dale,
I mean, you got
him over.
I've lived in Mobile, 12 years, and we had beautiful, I guess, Japanese camellias down there. And I just didn't realize that a camellia would grow this far north, and the fact that they're shade loving, that really gets my attention too. So I did make a couple of notes.
Yeah. Great plants for the shade. They're good companions with azaleas that are blooming in the spring, and then you have this in the fall. So they're great. About the same cultural conditions: acid soil, good drainage.
All right, there you have it. Your camellias. Okay. Why guess when you can soil test? You hear us say that all the time because it's one of the best ways to diagnose many of the problems you may be having and correct them. Right now, we're going to take a tour of the soil lab in Nashville to show you how they analyze it.
I would like to encourage growers to soil test before they assume that they've done something wrong. Because sometimes we might buy a shrub or buy a tomato plant or plant some things and it not go right, and we think, oh, well, we must have planted it too deep, or it had a disease. I encourage you to soil test. It's cheap. It's $7. You can get the results back within a week, And it's the best $7 I think you'll ever spend. And plus, you can't tell by looking at your garden what it needs or what your soil fertility is. You only can know that through a soil test.
We get a daily delivery of the U.S. mail, and we also get UPS, and I guess FedEx does also send samples. So whichever is most convenient for the person, they'll send it in that way. Then once it arrives, we open up the samples. As soon as all the paperwork is checked in, paid for, then I line up our sample or trays. I usually test on a tray. We'll have groups of 40.
The sample is dried at 150 degree temperature, and then the sample is ground, passed through a crusher, and then through a tin mesh so that all the soil particles are the same size or less, so that'll facilitate analysis. At that point, the sample is split off in two different directions. One 10-gram sample is measured for water pH, which tells us essentially the pH of the soil, which indicates how available or unavailable the plants may be, and also that analysis gives us an indication as to whether we need lime or not. And then 5 grams of that sample is measured off to do the elemental analysis, and that's phosphorus, potassium, calcium, magnesium in the basic test. And then if there are any other increments that are ordered, then we can also do that analysis with that 5-gram sample. And then from that point, the results are tallied. They are stored in a database, and then we take those soil test results along with the information that you provided on your information sheet. So if you want recommendations for a garden or a warm season lawn, or if you're wanting 200 bushel per acre corn, we'll provide lime and fertilizer recommendations based on the soil test results, and those recommendations are formulated using the University of Tennessee row crop recommendations.
The main thing is quality control, making sure that your samples are, you keep the integrity of them, and so that's kind of where we focus. And Debbie has the degree in the soil, and that's why when you call, you end up usually talking to Debbie on the phone, and she can help you interpret the numbers that I pull off of the instruments.
Crop codes are used to give us an idea of what you're trying to grow. Otherwise, we don't know, and we've got over 100 crop codes in our database. And each one, many of them are the same if you look at pounds of nutrient per acre, but we've done the math for you. So say for example, if you're growing squash, okay, let's say summer squash, we have that in a large, like a VC crop code, but the recommendation you would be getting would be per acre. And most homeowners don't have an acre-sized garden. And then they would be calling us going, okay, how am I going to put 300 pounds of this on my, how do I figure this out? So essentially we've done the math for you. And so if you choose the G crop code, which is garden, it's for all those plants that are typically grown in a garden in an increment that's easier to consume, that's in per 1,000 square feet. Now, regarding your lawn, there is a little bit of difference because lawns typically consume or require more nitrogen than we recommend for gardens. And of course, that depends on the test result as well. But as a general rule, a Bermuda grass lawn would be fertilized many times a year, typically 2, maybe 3 times in the fall, and then once or twice again in the spring. We don't recommend an application like that for a garden. We get the rap for not recommending very high amounts of fertilizer. There's several reasons for that, and a lot of it is cost, but also environmentally. Our recommendations are sustainable because they're very small, and I've had people call and say, well, you can't even see the fertilizer on the ground when you apply it. I said, well, that's the point. You need it, but you only need very little. So if we say 5 pounds per 1,000 square feet, it doesn't mean 10 pounds is better. It means don't go over 5 pounds. That's all you need. And if you add more fertilizer than's recommended, then you stand the chance of contamination. And it also, too, as these fertilizers, and especially potassium is a salt, as you over-fertilize or keep fertilizing year after year after year with high rates of fertilizers, you'll build up the salt volume in your soil, and salt is toxic to most plants. And so you'll end up with an over-fertilization problem, and then there's nothing you can do about that. Just give it time. I think it's good to plan. So my advice is to soil test now for your garden in the spring. Is it wet? Yes, it's cold, and the ground will be frozen here before long, but we can dry soils. And actually, you can dry your own soil, not in an oven, but put it on a paper plate and lay it out on the countertop. It'll dry by itself in a day or so. A dry sample is cheaper to ship than a wet sample. But yes, soil test far enough ahead of time, not necessarily for us, but for you, so that you can plan and have all those things ready to go when it comes time to plant.
All right, Mr. D, we've taken our soil samples to the lab. Ms. Debbie is running the analysis for us. What do we do next once we get our results?
This is why you need to pay attention in math class. You need to pay attention in math class, because this is an example of when a little bit of algebra goes a long way in your soil test results. I've got a soil test report here. Actually, this is the soil test report from our garden outside.
Good.
And
Okay.
I've hung on to that. The numbers that you get across the top of the soil test might be kind of Greek to you, but it tells you the pH and it tells you the levels of the different elements that you have. And there are symbols, like example right here, the phosphorus, it's got an H, that means high, and V, very high, S means sufficient. So those are just some codes that you can follow. And down in the text of this soil test report, it explains all that to you.
Right.
So don't let this get you intimidated. You know, go further into the soil test report, and it basically breaks it down to levels for you. For example, the first section down here talks about establishment. So if you're starting a garden or starting a lawn, then you follow that set of instructions.
Right.
The next section talks about maintenance, and that's if you've already got a lawn going and you've already got a vegetable garden. This is what you do to maintain it, and it takes the numbers that are on the front page and makes a recommendation on a per 1,000 square foot basis. Now, if you're a farmer and you've got soybeans and cotton and corn, it will be on a per acre basis.
Right.
But all that you do is, if it tells you that you need 5 pounds of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet, you need to measure how big your lawn is or how big your garden is. And you got to remember how to do that. That's not algebra, but the length times the width equals the number of square feet. And if you've got if it's odd shapes, just take several of these odd shapes, come up with the square footage and add it together. And you take that 5 pounds per 1,000 square feet and you break it down, equals X over the number of actual square footage that you have, and it'll tell you exactly how much fertilizer to put out on that 1,000 square, or on that plot that you have.
Right.
Now, I recommend when you apply the fertilizer, try to put out at a half rate going one way, and then the other half of it going that way. Because when I've tried to put it all out going that way, usually when I get about 75% finished, I'm done, I'm out, and then I've got a problem. I've over-fertilized. But if you try to put a 1/2 X rate out, going one way and then crisscross it, you won't have as many strips,
right.
where you missed. But that's pretty much all there is to it. It's really very simple. Read on down into the soil test report, and then you'll understand. I mean, it makes it very simple for you.
Yes, it does. I mean,
If you still can't understand it, call
Yeah,
Chris.
yeah.
You call Chris,
we can
and
help you
he'll
with
break
that
it down for you.
interpretation. And something else too, there is a limestone recommendation as well that you would get from the lab.
Right. If you need it.
it.
If you, for example, for our vegetable garden, it said lime is not recommended
Yeah.
at this time. And the reason lime was not recommended on our vegetable garden, our pH was 6.8, which is perfect.
Okay.
You know, 6 to 6.5, 6.8 is perfect for most vegetables.
Right.
A little high for your camellias
Yes.
and azaleas and
Around
blueberries.
5.5.
Yeah, 5. You want it acid enough to burn the soles off your shoes, pretty much for blueberries and azaleas. You know, 5.5, 5.8 is good there.
And let me ask you this: so, how long should one follow those recommendations that we get?
General rule of thumb is 3 years.
Okay.
Every 3 years. Now, if you're using a lot of wood ash, you're putting wood ash out, you probably need to soil test more often. If you, one thing you need to remember, if you get your soil check, make sure that it'll ask you for a code for what,
Most
basically what
important.
you're going to
Yes.
plant there. If you're thinking about planting blueberries next year, put blueberries on there. Put vegetables on there. Put turf grass. Put everything on there that you might plant in that area. And it doesn't cost you any more, but you'll get specific recommendations on how to treat that soil for whatever you're putting out there. So, you know, be very specific about, you know, what kind of plants you're going to plant.
All right, there you have it from Mr. DM himself. Okay, Dale, here's our Q&A session. You know
All
how this
right.
thing works, okay?
All right.
We have a viewer question from Mel down in Hernando, Mississippi.
All right.
The question is, we are new to the Mid-South. Welcome. And they have a couple of questions. We have Encore azaleas. When and how do you prune them? They are beginning to spread into other plants. So it's good that we have Dale here today, isn't it?
Yeah, you know, encore azaleas have, as the name implies, they provide an encore. So that's a second blooming generally in the fall. So you get the spring flush and the fall flush. And you'll get scattered blooms all season. But generally, immediately after the huge flush of flowers is when you'll want to prune the encores. And of course, all the other azaleas that you plant, the typical ones that just bloom in the spring, you prune those as soon as they flower. So soon after they flower. So you don't want to cut the blossoms off. If you prune them before they flower, you're going to cut off your blooms for that year. So, you know, I have a neighbor that was out cutting his, didn't say a word, but he was out cutting his glaciers the other day, and it was like, oh gosh, he's cutting off all those blooms, but didn't say a word.
Does he know what you do for a living? And there's also another question about Bermuda grass. When do you apply pre-emergent and what type? You apply pre-emergent for your winter weeds
fall
in the
pre-emergent.
fall. So that's usually in September. For the spring, I always say late February, early March to catch crabgrass and some of your summer annual broadleaf weeds. Okay, most of those come in the granular form. Some of your active ingredients, prodiamine, dithiopyr, and pendimethalin is what you need to look for because that will control your crabgrass and some of your summer annual broadleaf weeds. So timing is critical. It's most important. So
Have to get it
fall
before the
for
seeds
winter,
sprout.
Yes, and early spring for your summer annual weeds.
Be careful if you're putting out a fescue lawn. I've heard of people putting out fescue lawns and they spread out fescue seed, then they come behind with their pre-emergent and they wonder why their fescue doesn't germinate.
And I get those calls, and they
Pre-emergent
wonder why.
work.
You're exactly right. So timing is critical. We have time for one more question. My pansies are dying. Says, what could be the problem?
There could be a lot of problems.
Could be, yeah.
Well, pansies are heavy feeders. They like a fair amount of nitrogen, but if they prepared the soil properly and they're not in a hole and they're getting adequate drainage, they're fairly easy.
And I know one problem that pansies do have is called black root rot. So you have to make
Phytophthora
sure.
or Pythium or one of those.
Pythium, I
organizations.
Yeah, Pythium. So you have to make sure that, you know, wherever you buy your plant material, you get them from a reputable nursery. Make sure that you pull them out. Look at the roots. The roots are dingy looking, or they smell or something like
They
that.
should be white.
You don't want that because they should be white.
Yeah, and as much rain as we've had lately, you know, that
It could
very
be.
likely to be, you know, that Could
It
be a
could be,
problem.
because I got my pansies out pretty early, and we've had significant rainfall since then, so.
I always tell people to get the pansies out early. It's amazing. We will get really busy in the fall at the Dixon, and we won't get our pansies out until November, late November. And if you've waited till late November, there's a huge difference in how the pansies perform. October's the best time to get them out.
All right, there you got it from Dale. There you go. That's all we have time for today. Thanks for watching. We've only got one more episode of The Family Plot left in this season, so be sure to connect with us. Receive weekly email updates about Family Plot by visiting WKNO.org and signing up under Get Local Show Updates. I'm Chris Cooper, and be sure to join us next time for The Family Plot, Gardening in the Mid-South. Be safe.
Production funding for the Family Plot, Gardening in the Mid-South is provided by Good Winds Landscape and Garden Center in Germantown since 1943 and continuing to offer its plants for successful gardening with 7 greenhouses and 3 acres of plants, plus comprehensive landscape services. International Paper Foundation, the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.